for the moves toward gun control in Vermont, which was, quite frankly, I came here in 2002. I was transferred away in 2005, made back here in 2008, and in the last 18 months or so, I've seen stuff crop up here that I never expected to see. Immediately after Sandy Hook, of course, I think that the biggest favor that was done to us as the gun rights community in Vermont was from all people Philip Baruch when he brought out that S-32 immediately, that assault weapons bill. We were friends at one time, now we're not. But actually, in a very real sense, I think that we owe him a debt of thanks because it energized the gun rights community and it let us know what was coming. And of course, from that point forward, we have Linda Wade Simpson. She came out with her proposed restrictions on magazine size, and she wanted to implement a permit for concealed weapons in Vermont, disguised as a safety certificate. Another interesting thing that she did was, that was H-124. There was another bill called H-125, where she wanted to establish a facility for the storage of confiscated weapons in the presence of domestic violence orders, as if these confiscations were happening all the time and the storage facilities of police departments were overflowing, which of course is just not the case. That was shot down, obviously. But what was interesting that came out of it, that I shouldn't say came out of it, but what I'm going to suspect came out of it, is that the issue of storage of firearms confiscated in the presence of a relief from abuse order came up again with this H-735. Got tucked away into a fee bill, and it kind of laid there quietly at first because, quite frankly, a bunch of us were paying attention to something else. We were watching the municipal ordinances in Burlington, which began as 5 and were eventually whittled down to 3. And they, of course, fly in the face of 24 VSA 2295, which prohibits municipalities from making their own gun laws. Obviously, this is an assault on that particular law. And they hemmed and hawed, they delayed it, they made sure it didn't come up in this final half of the biennium prior to the elections. So we'll be doing that next year, along with a host of other stuff. But what we did get out of this session is this firearm storage stuff in H-735. When the thing hit the Judiciary Committee, and it was the gun rights community that pushed it there, my friend David Cutler from Gun Owners of Vermont, Senator Sears asked, well, how did this pass the House? I have to believe that it passed the House because nobody really read it. They thought, okay, fees, firearms storage, domestic violence, good to go. Who's going to be against that?
Lippert.
What was it? Pardon?
Bill Lippert.
Bill Lippert.
That's how it passed the House.
Really?
Okay.
When I called Sergeant Arms, the person in his office told me that it passed by unanimous voice vote, unanimously, which to me suggests that nobody really read the thing because they didn't think that it represented new law. When in fact it does. One thing that has changed, and this is the critical thing, is that law enforcement can confiscate firearms if it goes like this. Shall, upon service of the order, immediately surrender to a law enforcement officer or court-appointed federally licensed firearms dealer any firearms, ammunition, or weapons in the person's possession, custody, or control. Never mind the fact that means they can go to a kid's joint for steak knives, so that's not what I'm really worried about. But that's in both versions of the bill, the House and Senate bill. And the change is that prior to this, there had to be a hearing for confiscation of weapons. And prior to this, there had to be a violation of that order. That all changes with this, as they disguise it as a fee structure. And we're not going to get any help from the National Rifle Association on this. They're throwing us under the bus. The Vermont Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs is the state-level entity that is basically the Vermont manifestation of the NRA. And they made some kind of deal with Chevron on this. I had a call the other day. It was really funny. One of the guys from the Federation called me, getting his eggs mixed up. He was thinking he was calling Eddie Cutler from Gun Owners of Vermont, but he got me instead. And the guy seemed almost plaintive because this the schism over this issue is fragmenting the Federation, and they're losing a lot of credibility now with the gun rights community. Now, on one hand, we can't really afford that because next year we're going to need it. But on the other hand, they made a deal with the devil. I tried not to see it that way. And in the end, I didn't really have any choice. What the guy from the Federation told me, not even me, but the acting president, Chris Bradley, he tried to tell me that if this thing passes, okay, you get served with the order, you go to your lawyer, you have time before you go to court to get rid of your firearms before the hearing. Not the case. If you read the thing, they can take them on the spot. So if either he didn't read it, or the guy was drinking a chain, which I didn't really appreciate. I'm not sure which it is. As it stands now, to confiscate the weapons, once again, the firearms rather, once again, there has to be a violation of that relief from abuse order. This changes it. The order just has to be put out there. Even that 10-day temporary, bang, right then and there.
Can you back that up and say what kind of evidence is required for that? I.e. zero?
I.e. zero, exactly.
So this is just a filing where relief from abuse order, the minute it's filed,
in this
law, you're saying,
when the cops come over and they serve the order,
a weapon.
when the cops come over and they serve the order on you, as I'm reading this, they can take it right then and there on the spot. Prior to any court hearing, that violates Fourth Amendment, that violates due process. This 42 analysis, a couple of friends of mine did. This is being supported by statistics from Sarah Kenny, who's the Vermont Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission, and her own statistics don't really support the issue, which leads me back to Burlington for just 1 second. One of the ordinances that they passed in Burlington provides something rather similar to this, where the police can, on suspicion that domestic violence may have occurred, take any firearms present in the house, regardless of who they belong to. So let's say the cops say to the guy, okay, you got to leave, she can stay, we're taking all the guns in the house, good job, you just disarmed the victim, if there is a victim. This is similar to that, and it's a phenomenon that I'm theorizing. Historically, in Vermont, where you have a Democratic supermajority, you have for a long time. The Democrats have had pretty effective control. And yet we don't have gun laws here like they do in New York. Yet we don't have gun laws like in Connecticut or California. Because the issue of gun rights in Vermont, Vermonters and Vermont being what it is, has historically been a third rail. People have been afraid to touch it and they've seen what happens when they do. And so what they're doing is this isn't going to fly with a lot of people, but this is what I think. They're exploiting the issue of domestic violence to create a second, third rail. So therefore, if you oppose any of these new gun laws that they're coming up with, even the ones hidden in this fee bill, then you must not be opposed to domestic violence. They're creating a second, third rail. And if you look at Sarah Kenny's statistics that she brought before the Senate Finance Committee, I was there last Monday, she says 56% of Vermont's domestic violence-related homicides are committed with firearms. 80% of the suicides associated with the homicides and domestic violence are committed with firearms. All right, she's talking about statistics over 20, they're 20 years old, and they're double the current rate for the last 4 years. 80% of suicides in 19 years, 23 approximately, 1 per year in a state of over 600,000 inhabitants, and followed by the way, 5% of all domestic violence deaths are caused by law enforcement officers. We have an epidemic. We have an epidemic that requires legislation. This is an emergency situation. I don't think so. That's another.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
I know a little bit about this issue.
Okay.
The domestic violence problem is not guns. At
Okay.
all. You're right. Her stats are very misleading. If you look at what's happened, there have been a few deaths, by someone being shot as a domestic violence dispute. But more often than not, it's strangling. It's if you remember the issue of the woman in Bedford, her estranged husband through industrial law.
Right, yeah.
She didn't die, she almost did.
No.
But I mean, very often it's these other horrific things, and it's not that. So I'm with you. I just don't understand the connection. That's a problem. The problem with domestic violence is beyond guns.
No, it's,
And it is a problem in Vermont, but this is not the cure.
It's people, it's psychology. You know what it is they're using it as a stalking horse to go after the guns.
You're correct.
In the wake of Newtown, you saw all these people declaring a sudden state of emergency, and it's worth noting that these are people who have always had this agenda. What was the first thing Dianne Feinstein did after Newtown? She brought the assault weapons stuff back. It's not like she just thought of it that day. Also, all these people are seizing the opportunity to implement an agenda that they've always had. The statistics that Sarah Kane is using comes from where? Michael Bloomberg. Comes from his Mayors Against Illegal Guns. They've been questioned in public over and over again and debunked by countless groups. The data is skewed and ranked, and the FBI always tells you, don't rank it to achieve what they want. They spin the data to support their desired ends. We've had on average, two firearm-related deaths per year over the last 4 years, down from an average of 4 back in the 1990s. So, if Sarah Kenny is saying that women in the U.S. are 11 times more likely than women in other developed countries to be murdered with guns, what does that have to do with Vermont? Why does that require new legislation in this state? When the 19 number, which one was it? The 56% of the 23 in the last 20 years or something like that. And that was all, right? When that was brought up in the Senate Finance Committee meeting, Sarah Kenny called that into question. Where did you get that? They says from your own reports. Yeah, the report that she wrote, the report that she commissioned. And what was the response to that? She said, the lives of victims of domestic violence literally depend on our state's ability to secure and store firearms when a state court has ordered that an abuser's gun be relinquished. Vermont's current system of relinquishment and storage is inadequate and places victims of domestic violence at risk. Okay, parse that. When a state court has ordered that an abuser's gun is to be relinquished. No, we're creating new law here. It's immediately on the issuance of a TRO, and that's a big change. And even the Federation, even the Vermont Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs, our local arm of the National Rifle Association, is trying to tell me to my face, that this is not new law. The hell it isn't. That's exactly what it is. And it opens the door to goodness knows what else. There's a sense that among lawmakers, pressure from certain elements of their constituencies, and of course pressure from lobbying groups like Mayors Against Illegal Guns and Moms Demand Action and the brand new shiny every town for gun safety. Bloomberg's been failing with his last two, so what's he going to do? He's going to create a brand new one and throw $50 million at it. Okay, there's 100 million gun owners in the United States. I promise you, I'll spend more than 50 cents fighting that guy. Easily. So, $50 million is supposed to impress me. It really doesn't. According to the annual Domestic Violence Commission reports, 2009 saw 0 domestic violence homicides by firearm. 2010 we had 1, 2011 we had 3, 2012 we had 1. Over 5,000 people die in Vermont every year. 5 firearms per deaths in 4 years. And this is an epidemic. This is an emergency requiring new legislation. Now, what this is that look around you. Okay, look at Connecticut, look at New York. How those gun measures got ramped up pretty darn quick. And in fact, Connecticut and New York find themselves in a hell of a position right now because in Connecticut, somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 people are defying the law. In New York, it's more like 1 million. What are you going to do? You just passed a law, 1 million people are telling you to pound sand. What kind of position does that put you in? And then, of course, Massachusetts has always been, it's been for the longest time, extremely restrictive, thanks in large part from a member of the big pro-gun Republican Party, Mitt Romney. Okay, so they're encroaching upon us, and they're bringing this stuff to Vermont because that's the next jewel in the crown. That's the feather in Mr. Bloomberg's cap. Guns to me are a canary in the coal mine. I've heard a lot of stuff here today I've agreed with. I've heard of a couple things here and there that I didn't necessarily, because I come from the hereditarily the left side of the aisle. But the guns are something I've always descended on. And since this push came up after Sandy Hook, I've begun to see it as a canary in the coal mine. We look at the NSA overreach and some of the stuff that's in the NDAA that provides for indefinite detention without trial. What right is next? We can't afford to compromise on any one of them. And the Second Amendment, I think, is being targeted because it's extremely emotional. We have people out there like Shannon Watts saying stuff like, "You're worried we're going to take our guns? I'm worried you're going to take my kids. What am I going to do?" Okay. What am I going to do? Peter Lanza, the father of Adam Lanza, we all know who Adam is, was interviewed in, I believe it was Esquire magazine, 12-page interview, something like that. I invite you to read that. Read that interview. Then come back, look me in the eye, tell me with a straight face that you propose to impose restrictions upon me because of what that man's psychotic son did. Not going to apply. As I said, I wasn't really prepared to speak today, but since Scott didn't show up, I'll do it. If there's any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Are there any questions?
I just want to make a comment. I think the bottom line here is that this 735 might be the most important thing we could all do between now and May is to call about that and say no to 735.
Right. It's gaining national attention, and unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, we can't count on DNRA for this one. They're not going to help us. We're going to have to do it ourselves. The key things to remember is that they're telling you it doesn't create new law when in fact it does, and it violates some pretty basic constitutional protections. It's easy to say, hey, don't beat your wife and you won't have any problems. Remember, if you're not doing anything wrong, you don't have anything to worry about. Okay? A person can get a TRO for any reason. The woman I live with would get a TRO on me tomorrow just because she says, hey, I'm scared of this guy. He yelled at me last night. Under this, my guns go away on the spot. Unless I can know she's going to the courthouse and I can arrange a voting accident first.
How do they, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, how do the police know for sure if there's a firearm in the house in the event of like a domestic issue?
Well, I'm not really sure about that, except I would imagine the person filing the TRO could tell them. You could deny all day that you had any guns in the house, but you know how the cops are. Okay, well, we got this reason to take you to jail, or that reason to take you to jail. They're pretty expert to push people around if you don't know your stuff. It's just a road that I don't think we want to go down.
I actually have an answer to that. Has anybody in the room gone to the doctor and asked if there were firearms in your house?
Yeah, but can they get those right?
Wait a minute. Has anybody been asked that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
No.
Then if the cops go for a TRW, they know the answer to that question.
So if you live with somebody.
Would they know if you didn't answer it?
They would know if you didn't. The person that answered the question said, yes, there's guns in my house. When the TRO gets filed, they will look at that answer and say there are guns in the house.
The two times I have been asked that question by medical professionals, I've told them none of your damn business.
But your spouse, girlfriend, wife, whatever, if she answered yes, if they go to TRO,
okay.
the answer will be yes, there are guns in the house. They won't ask you. They'll say, we heard there are guns in the house.
They can say that anyway, but yeah, you're right.
More of a quip. How can you have a new statute enacted and not have it be a new law? That's the one I'm...
Exactly.
That's the one I'm...
Right. They hit it in the fee bill for just that reason. So they can say, okay, it's going to be a fee, and someone's relinquishing their firearms, so we're going to charge you a $25 intake fee and $4 a week per gun for the length of the order. But what they didn't tell you was that they changed the circumstances under which firearms could be ordered to be relinquished.
Last question.
No.
There's another really important reason why this is important. The majority of the legislators are looking at this bill to see if there's any blowback come the next election cycle. The reason why
It's a test case.
Right.
they don't go near this because often when they go after gun rights stuff, they get trounced comes election time. If this goes through and they start saying, you didn't get trounced when you voted for this, that is another. The victory that we had, the loss at Burlington, the Sportsmen's Confederation knew it was going to be a loss in Burlington. It's considered a huge win because Montpelier wouldn't take it up. And as long as the legislators are scared to touch this stuff, win.
So we'll have to cut the topic off short. I apologize. This is a great topic. So if you look on your agenda, it's not Scott Chapman, it's Ed Garcia, right?
Yes.
And is there a website or contact information?
Sure. Vermont Citizens Defense League on Facebook. We have a website that we're not doing a whole lot with. We should start doing a little bit more with it, which is vtcdl.org.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.